On the broadcast tonight, big consequences, controversies following the Park Geun-hye administration's first budget draft. Increased budget proposal in time of rising sovereign debt and a scaled-back pension program. We'll have an analysis. Public agencies in Korea are faced with a daunting task of streamlining their businesses in order to tackle the growing debt problem. This as the nation's combined debt is projected to reach more than $530 billion in 2017. The United States and Russia reach an agreement on a draft UN Security Council resolution that would demand the destruction of Syria's chemical weapons arsenal. We'll have the details on Early Edition at 6.
It is 5 a.m. in Washington, noon in Damascus, and 6 on a Friday evening here in Seoul. Welcome to Early Edition at 6. I'm Moon Gon-young.
And I'm Daniel Chan. Thank you for tuning in. We begin with the chain of events that followed after Budget 2014 was unveiled.
Right, the Korean government's budget proposal for next year has stirred up a fair share of controversy all across the country, facing strong criticism from the opposition party over plans to scale back President Park's welfare pledges.
Taking responsibility for the backlash, the nation's health and welfare minister offered to resign on Friday. But as our presidential office correspondent Oh Jin-ju reports, the president turned it down.
Health and Welfare Minister Chin Young offered his resignation on Friday, taking responsibility for not being able to fulfill President Park Geun-hye's key welfare pledges, especially those related to basic pension payouts. In an email sent to reporters, Chin apologized for causing concern to the public and extended his best wishes for the health of the Korean people and the success of the Park administration. However, President Park immediately turned down his resignation through Prime Minister Chung Hong-won. Chung, in a statement, said the government couldn't accept his resignation ahead of a parliamentary inspection into the administration and at a time when there are so many pending issues to solve. He asked Chin to stay in his post at least until the National Assembly's regular session is over. Chung's comments come in line with President Park's remarks at Thursday's cabinet meeting, during which the government unveiled its budget proposal for 2014. The president ordered her cabinet members to work together to overcome and solve the economic hardships currently facing the government so that the public can appreciate their dedicated efforts. Minister Chin has not appeared at the health ministry all day. With the president having turned down his resignation, it is unclear as of now as to what Chin will do. Should he insist on stepping down and start a tug-of-war with the presidential office of Cheongwade, it will likely spark controversy in the political arena. Oh Jin-ju, Arirang News.
The Korean government has unveiled a $332 billion spending proposal for next year that aims to meet campaign pledges over welfare programs amid weak economic growth. This, however, led the government to push back plans to balance its budget.
Right, 333 or 332 billion, depending on the currency rate. Now, so will the government be able to cope with concerns over growing government debt? For this and more, we have Arirang News' Hwang Ji-hye standing by at our news center. So, Ji-hye, welfare was the key word in next year's proposal, although some necessary welfare benefits had to be scaled back a bit.
Yes, Kanyang, the budget announcement includes about $98 billion in spending on health and welfare. That's a more than 8% rise compared to 2013 and accounts for almost a third of all spending in next year's proposed budget, making it the largest allocation for health and welfare in the nation's history. But as much emphasis as the Park Geun-hye administration put on meeting its welfare campaign pledges, it also placed importance on stimulating the economy. Finance Minister Han Oh-seok said yesterday that it's important to solidify a recovery, although it would be prudent to reduce spending for fiscal soundness.
KGS, so what specific plans were laid out by the government that focus on boosting the economy?
Well, the government had expected to significantly reduce its projected spending on social overhead capital, including on roads, schools, and public parks, by 13%, but only did so by a mere 4.3%, down to $21 billion next year. The government also wants to boost investment through its budget plan. It calls for increased financial support for local small and medium-sized companies by $12 billion and plans to create a $1 billion fund for new growth engine industries. The budget plan includes a more than $9 billion rise in financial support for local exporters as well.
Now, Ji-hye, I suppose the big question is, will these budget plans help the Korean economy regain its footing?
Well, experts say that remains unclear. Despite government efforts to stimulate the economy, they say the budget draft for next year is mainly focused on welfare and that the total projected expenditures did not rise as much as last year.
The government said that it wanted to raise spending by 4.6% next year, which is down from a more than 5% rise last year. The budget plan would not have a major impact on fostering growth in the local economy, especially when the growth outlook for the global economy remains bleak.
Another main objective for the government in its budget draft is achieving fiscal health. How's the government meeting that goal, Jie?
The government said it planned to increase expenditures in 2014, but keep in mind that next year's government revenue is expected to drop 0.5% from 2013, the first decline in 4 years. If revenue does in fact drop and the budget plans move forward as is, the government would end up running a fiscal deficit in 2014 of 1.8% of the country's GDP. And as our Arirang reports, the national debt is going to surpass the worrying milestone of around $480 billion next year.
There has been growing concern the country's sovereign debt is increasing at an alarming pace, and the government's proposal for next year's budget envisages a further rise, stoking concerns about the country's fiscal health. The Finance Ministry said on Friday that the government's debt is projected to surpass 500 trillion won, or about $480 billion next year, a rise of 7% from this year. It's an eightfold increase since 1997, when the nation was hit by the Asian financial crisis. But officials say a deficit is inevitable next year because government spending is necessary to boost a still moribund economy. The nation's debt is now forecast to reach a record high of 36.5% of GDP, which appears to be at a manageable level compared to the OECD average of 108%. But it's another story when taking into account debt held by state companies or payment guarantees offered by the government for various debt finance projects. That's because their combined liabilities far exceed the total government debt, and their debt loads could potentially pose a serious risk if Korea faces an economic crisis in the future.
The sovereign debt is at a manageable level for now, but if there is a sharp rise in social welfare costs, or if tax revenues dwindle from worsening economic conditions, Korea could well follow the footsteps of the likes of Japan and Southern Europe.
Government policymakers say they are working on measures to control the public debt, but they have yet to present a convincing plan. Arirang, Arirang News.
Now, Ji-hye, so the Park administration has pledged to bump up its welfare spending, but it has no plans to raise taxes. Now, the two plans seem diametrically opposed. I mean, how realistic is this?
You're right, Kanyong. So there will be cuts. The government is working hard to scale back spending in the public sector, to reduce tax exemptions, and to crack down on underground economic activity in order to boost its tax base. But experts say the moves won't be enough to make ends meet, and that raising taxes could be an option down the road.
Okay, thank you for that, Jie. That was our Hwang Jie reporting on how the government aims to pay for its welfare plans.
Digging deeper, getting to the bottom of stories that impact your life. Talking with you on air and online. Connecting you with heroes and experts to help you understand the world's most pressing issues. News and current affairs at its best, with Moon Gun-young and Daniel Che on Early Edition at 6.
Now, shifting gears to the economy, Korean import prices rose by 2 points. Over at the National Assembly, the ruling and opposition parties finally agreed on Friday afternoon to normalize the National Assembly after weeks of political wrangling over non-legislative matters. The agreement Friday established a schedule of parliamentary proceedings for the days and weeks to come, including a parliamentary inspection of government offices for 3 weeks starting mid-October. Parliamentary hearings are also scheduled for 5 days starting November 11th. Since the National Assembly began its regular session on September 1st, it's been deadlocked with parties at odds over issues not related to legislative matters, most notably allegations that the National Intelligence Service meddled in last year's presidential election. The nation's Justice Ministry says it has secured enough testimony to prove the so-called love child allegations surrounding Prosecutor General or former Prosecutor General Choi Dong-wook. The Justice Ministry said it began an investigation in mid-September into allegations that Choi fathered an illegitimate son and found that Choi has been involved in a relationship with the mother of the child for the past few years. The ministry had also urged the presidential office of Cheongwade to accept Choi's offer to resign from his post, which was submitted 2 weeks ago. The opposition parties have been demanding a probe on that matter, accusing the presidential office of using its influence to force Choi from office because it was unhappy with the way he's handled recent political issues. And another news making headlines here in Korea, a Korean appeals court upheld a 4-year prison term for the head of Korea's third largest conglomerate on Friday over embezzlement charges. SK Group chairman Choi Tae-won was found guilty earlier this year for embezzling roughly nearly 50 billion won, about $45 million from 2 SK affiliates to make personal investments. Now, he was sent to prison right after Friday's verdict was delivered. The Seoul High Court also meted out punishment to Choi's younger brother, Choi Jae-won, who serves as SK Group's vice chairman. The court overturned an earlier acquittal of the younger Choi and sentenced him to 3.5 years for conspiring with his older brother.
The foreign ministers of Korea and Japan met in New York on Thursday on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, but failed to narrow their differences on a long-standing dispute. Korean Foreign Minister Yoon Byung-se urged his Japanese counterpart to take action to heal the wounds that remain from Japan's colonial rule of Korea, including the issue of Korean women forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military. Japan's Foreign Minister Fumio Kishida reportedly did not offer a substantive response to the request, saying only that he wants to improve relations between the two countries. And also meeting on the sidelines of the UN meeting on Thursday were top diplomats of U.S. and China. During this meeting, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi reaffirmed their commitment to ending North Korea's nuclear program, saying that the North has no other option but denuclearization. They also agreed to approach the North's nuclear issue with the aim of breaking the quote-unquote vicious cycle, a reference to the regime's repeated pattern of making promises in negotiations and then breaking them. Kerry also hailed Beijing's recent decision to ban exports of weapons materials to North Korea and re-emphasized the importance of China's role in dealing with the North.
North Korea is widely believed to have made progress with its nuclear program in recent months, focusing the world's attention on whether a 4th nuclear test could be in the works. Arirang News Foreign Affairs correspondent Hwang Sang-mi sat down with North Korea expert Scott Snyder in Seoul this week for the ASEAN-North Korea conference for his views on what to expect next.
So we're seeing a flurry of reports that North Korea may be actively developing its nuclear technology. What's your take on that?
Well, I think the signs are clear that North Korea does continue to try to develop its program. We've seen reports that the reactor at Yongbyon might be starting up, that the North Koreans continue to do motor tests to improve their missile program. And so even though they are not conducting a nuclear test or a missile test every day, it doesn't mean that they are not working on the program every day.
So does that mean that the international sanctions are not working?
Well, it means that the sanctions are, I think they're necessary but insufficient by themselves to prevent North Korea from continuing to work on its program.
So should we be expecting a fourth nuclear test to take place soon?
Well, I don't know what the North Koreans have in mind, but there's no reason to think that the North Koreans have decided not to conduct further nuclear tests.
So if a fourth nuclear test takes place, what should we expect from the international community?
We see following the third nuclear test that there is a new resolution, and we've seen new will on the part of China to more effectively implement some sanctions. So I think that possibly we might be talking about resolutions that authorize the same level of sanctions pressure on North Korea that we see being applied to Iran right now.
And meanwhile, what should the six-party member countries be doing?
Well, I think that basically the main requirement for resuming six-party talks is for North Korea to come back to where it was in 2008 when we were having six-party meetings. And that means explicitly stating a commitment to abandon nuclear weapons and to back that up by actions. No more nuclear testing, no more missile testing, and a recommitment to implementation of the framework for denuclearization.
Lastly, do you think North Korea will ever give up its nuclear program?
Well, the reality is that states that have tested have not given up their programs in the absence of a change in the leadership of those countries. So I think that what the United States and the other countries are trying to achieve through six-party talks is actually unprecedented. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't try. But it does mean that what we're trying, the outcome that we seek, would be a completely new outcome based on current experience with states that have tested nuclear devices.
Well, thank you for your insight, Dr. Snyder.
The United States and Russia have agreed on a draft UN Security Council resolution aimed at ridding Syria of its chemical weapons stockpile. The measure, which went into the full Security Council Thursday, could be voted on as early as this Friday. Our Kim Hyun-ji has the details.
The draft UN resolution, which brings to an end weeks of diplomatic deadlock, legally obligates Syria to give up its chemical stockpile.
I was pleased to have a meeting with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and we did reach agreement with respect to the resolution, but it's our hope that that process between the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons and the United Nations and its resolution can now move forward and give life, hopefully, to the removal and destruction of chemical weapons from Syria.
But the measure does not provide any means of automatic enforcement with sanctions or military force, according to Reuters. A major sticking point between Russia and Western powers before reaching an agreement was whether the resolution would be under Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, which allows the Council to enforce its decisions with sanctions or military force. Russia, a close ally of Syria, had opposed putting it under Chapter 7. China, which has backed Russia when it comes to vetoing Council resolutions on Syria, once again took sides with Moscow. As a result, Western powers and the Security Council backed away from many of their initial demands. The only reference to enforcement in the draft is a threat that if Syria fails to follow through, the Council would then impose punitive measures under Chapter 7. But this would require a second resolution, which Russia could veto again. Despite the seemingly major concession, a U.S. State Department official hailed the deal as a breakthrough. Washington and Moscow had agreed to eliminate Syria's chemical weapons in the wake of a sarin gas strike on civilians in the suburbs of Damascus last month, the world's deadliest chemical weapons attack in 25 years. Kim Hyun-ji, Arirang News.
The devil might be in the details, but it appears as though a window of opportunity has opened to deal with Iran's nuclear program. This following the highest level direct contact between Washington and Tehran in 6 years on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly Thursday. Arirang News' Kim Ji-yeon has this report.
Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif met with his U.S. counterparts and the other 4 permanent members of the UN Security Council and Germany, which make up the so-called P5+1, on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly on Thursday.
Discussions were very substantive, businesslike. We hope to be able to make progress towards resolving this issue in a timely fashion, based on respecting the rights of the Iranian people.
U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry also said the meeting went well, but warned that there was a lot of work to be done. Iran and the P5+1 agreed to hold another round of talks on the issue on October 15th and 16th in Geneva. Since the election of the new Iranian President Hassan Rouhani in June, Iranian officials have tried to reach out to the West and the international community in order to address concerns over its nuclear programs. Earlier, Rouhani said that no country should possess nuclear arms and added that it was necessary to establish a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. The U.S. and Iran severed diplomatic ties in 1980 after the outbreak of the Islamic Revolution in Iran the year before. And the last meeting between an American and Iranian leader was in 1977. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Korea's main gateway, the world-class Incheon International Airport, broke ground Thursday on its second terminal, which is slated for completion just before the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in 2018. Our Ji Myung-gil has the story.
Top-ranked Incheon International Airport is getting a second terminal to handle the ever-increasing volume of passengers and cargo into Korea.
In order for Incheon International Airport to become a global hub and Northeast Asia's leading airport, we must upgrade not just the airport's capacity, but also its facilities and equipment.
The terminal is slated for completion in 2017, just in time for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics in 2018. The airport opened its doors to the world in March 2001, and since then it has handled some 44 million passengers and 4.5 million tons of cargo every year. If the trend continues, the airport is expected to become saturated around 2017. The new terminal will handle an extra 18 million passengers and 1.3 million tons of cargo per year, giving the airport a total capacity of 62 million passengers and 5.8 million tons of cargo.
The new facility will be located in front of the existing one and will include a passenger terminal and an air traffic control center with a total area of 384,000 square meters, which is equivalent to approximately 53 soccer fields.
The cost is estimated at roughly $2 billion. The airport was ranked the 8th busiest airport in the world in terms of international passengers in 2010. And was ranked by Airports Council International the world's best airport for 7 consecutive years from 2005 to 2012. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
It's time for weather. That means we turn to our Michelle Park at the Weather Center. Michelle, it looks like we're going to have our first semi-official autumn weekend, right?
That's right, Daniel, and it's about time we did.
Right, but you've got to be careful really in the mornings and at night because it's getting really pretty cold these days.
I know, right? This kind of weather is very perfect for you to get sick, so make sure you dress warmly. Although we had an amazing weather throughout this whole week, unfortunately tomorrow we won't see much of the sun. And starting in Jeolla province, you can expect rain tomorrow, and this will spread over the whole nation on Sunday, and this will last until Monday. Taking a closer look at the forecast. Some of the regions will see rain, and Seoul will start off the morning at 15 and reach over to 20 degrees in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will both peak at 25 degrees respectively. And down onto Jeju Island, you can see rain in the afternoon. Dokdo should peak at 22, while Mount Kumgang hits very cool at 16. Well, that's all I have for you tonight. I'm Michelle Park, and have a wonderful Friday evening.
Thank you for that, Michelle. And that's all from us for this hour. Thank you for watching. This has been Daniel Che.
And I'm Moon Geon-young. Thank you as always for being here with us. I enjoy your weekend, and we're going to see you right back here same time Monday evening. Good night.